My name is Mark Hollister, and I never imagined that the day I discovered Emily's betrayal would be the day my life began to shatter. For years, I had believed in the steady rhythm of our life together, a life filled with shared dreams, quiet dinners, and promises made in the glow of twilight. Yet, as the golden hues of our memories faded, a darker, painful truth emerged, forcing me to confront the inevitable. The woman I loved was no longer the person I thought I knew. I still remember that rainy November evening when I arrived home from work. The city streets were slick with rain, and I could hear the steady patter of raindrops against the pavement. My mind was occupied with thoughts of the long hours and looming deadlines at the office, and all I longed for was the warmth and comfort of our little apartment. I turned the key in the lock, expecting the usual welcome from Emily, perhaps the aroma of her cooking mingling with the smell of the rain. But instead, I was met with an eerie silence that struck me as profoundly wrong. The living room, usually cozy and inviting with its soft lighting and scattered mementos of our shared life, felt strangely foreign that night. On the coffee table lay an envelope, uncharacteristically plain and out of place. My pulse quickened as I picked it up with trembling hands. Inside was a series of letters and photographs, a visual chronicle of moments I had no part in, snapshots of laughter, stolen glances, and secret rendezvous. The pictures were unmistakable. There was a man, his face hidden in part by shadows, yet his arms around Emily told me everything. My heart sank with each image that confirmed what I had feared most. At first, disbelief gripped me. I searched my memory for any sign, any hint that would suggest Emily's infidelity. Had I missed something? The countless evenings I had spent waiting for her to return from late meetings? The strange phone calls that ended abruptly when I entered the room? All the signs suddenly converged into a painful clarity. The very foundation of our marriage, built on trust and loyalty, was crumbling before my eyes. I sat down on the worn-out sofa, the envelope still clutched in my hand, as the cold reality of betrayal seeped into my bones. Emotions swirled within me, anger, sorrow, and an overwhelming sense of loneliness. The shock of the discovery left me numb, unable to process the enormity of what had just happened. In that moment, every cherished memory with Emily twisted into a bitter reminder of what had been lost. My mind replayed our early days together when everything was so simple. I remembered the way her smile lit up the room and how her laughter resonated with the promise of a future filled with hope. We had built a life together, one that I had believed was unbreakable. The trust one had placed in her seemed like a fragile illusion now, shattered by the reality of her choices. I began to question every moment we had shared, wondering if love had ever truly existed or if it was all just a series of lies and half-truths. In the days that followed, I wandered the quiet streets of our neighborhood, the weight of the revelation pressing down on me like an invisible shroud. I would often pause at the park bench where we used to sit together on lazy Sunday afternoons, now feeling like a solitary island amidst the hustle of everyday life. Every corner of our home reminded me of Emily, her favorite chair by the window, the delicate vase of wildflowers on the dining table, even the sound of her soft footsteps in the hallway. The pain of betrayal was not just in the act itself but in the erosion of the shared history that we had once built. I reached out to my closest friend, Daniel, who had always been a pillar of support. Over coffee in our small, familiar cafe, I recounted the events in a shaky voice, the words barely escaping my lips as I struggled to articulate the depth of my devastation. Daniel listened intently, his eyes reflecting a mixture of sorrow and concern. "You deserve honesty, Mark," he said, his voice steady yet filled with compassion. "You deserve to know the truth, even if it's painful." His words, though meant to console, only deepened the chasm of my isolation. I felt adrift, caught in the tumult of emotions and the crushing realization that the future I had envisioned was now nothing more than a mirage. As the nights grew colder and longer, my thoughts turned inward. I spent countless hours scribbling in my journal, attempting to capture the whirlwind of emotions that had overtaken me. I wrote about my memories of Emily, the way she once looked at me with unconditional love, the dreams we had planned for a shared future, and the silent promises exchanged under the starry sky. Each word was a reminder of the life we once had, now tainted by deceit and betrayal. Yet, as I wrote, I began to see a glimmer of truth emerge from the chaos, the realization that I could no longer remain shackled by a love that was built on lies. I started to understand that this painful chapter in my life was not the end, but rather the beginning of a journey toward reclaiming my identity and self-worth. In the midst of the heartbreak, I found a strange sense of clarity. I was forced to confront the vulnerabilities within myself, the need for validation, the desire for control, and the deep-seated fear of abandonment. The discovery of Emily's betrayal, as devastating as it was, also served as a catalyst for introspection and growth. I resolved to find strength in the pain and to emerge from this experience wiser, albeit scarred, but more attuned to the importance of self-respect. In the solitude of those days, I also began to wonder about the nature of trust. Trust, I realized, was not a given, it was something that had to be nurtured and continuously earned. The betrayal had left me questioning whether any relationship could ever be truly secure. Yet, deep down, I hoped that the pain might eventually transform into wisdom, a hard-earned lesson that would guide me in future relationships and help me establish boundaries that were vital for my emotional well-being. That evening, as I sat alone in our now quiet apartment, I made a silent vow to myself: I would not allow this betrayal to define me. The journey ahead promised to be arduous, filled with moments of anguish and flashes of clarity, but I was determined to rebuild my life one piece at a time. The chapters that lay ahead were uncertain, yet they held the promise of new beginnings, a chance to rediscover who I truly was, beyond the confines of a broken promise. I left that night with a heavy heart, yet with the faint stirrings of resolve. I was aware that the path ahead would be lined with obstacles, the remnants of our shared past haunting every step. But in that moment of solitude and despair, I made peace with the fact that sometimes, the end of one chapter is the necessary prelude to another. With every step I took away from our life together, I could feel the weight of the past slowly easing, making room for the possibility of a future untainted by betrayal. Thus began my solitary journey, a journey of pain, self-discovery, and the unyielding pursuit of inner strength. Though I was engulfed by the echoes of a shattered trust, I clung to the hope that someday, the wounds would heal, and I would emerge as a stronger, wiser man. But as I continue to walk this lonely path, I remain painfully aware that the final chapter of our story would be marked by a hostile, irrevocable separation, a bitter farewell to what once was, and a definitive end to the life we had built together. In the weeks that followed the painful discovery, my life became a mosaic of sleepless nights and restless days. The shock of betrayal still clung to me, its residue permeating every thought and every interaction. I knew that the time for evasion was over. The silent acceptance that had characterized my initial reaction was now replaced by a burning need for answers, a desperate longing to understand the depths of the deception that had upended my world. I began by confronting the stark reality of our shared home. Every object, every familiar sound, became a painful reminder of the trust that had been so casually shattered. The apartment, once a haven of warmth and security, now resembled a battleground, littered with relics of a love that had been marred by betrayal. With a trembling resolve, I knew that I could no longer let the ghost of our former life dictate my future. One chilly evening, with the rain pattering softly against the window, a constant echo of that fateful night, I decided that I could not wait any longer. I had to speak with Emily, to demand an explanation for the unthinkable. My mind raced with conflicting emotions, anger, sorrow, and a reluctant desire for closure. The internal dialogue was overwhelming, but there was one undeniable truth: I had to confront her face to face. When Emily returned that night, her eyes revealed a mixture of guilt and trepidation. The moment she stepped into the living room, I felt the weight of every unspoken word between us. I looked at her, and the familiar softness in her expression was replaced by a cold, distant gaze. It was as if the bond we once shared had been severed in an instant, leaving only a hollow shell of what had once been. "Emily," I began, my voice steady despite the tumult inside me, "we need to talk." The words hung heavily in the air, each syllable a stark reminder of the betrayal that had brought us to this precipice. She hesitated, then nodded silently. There was no denying the truth in her eyes, only a muted acknowledgement of the inevitable confrontation that had been building for weeks. We moved to the living room, where the shadows of our shared past danced on the walls. I could feel every beat of my heart, each thud a painful echo of the trust that had been broken. "I know about him," I said softly, though the words carried the weight of 1,000 shattered promises. "I know everything." My voice, though calm, trembled with the raw intensity of emotions that I had long suppressed. Emily's face paled, and for a moment, the tension in the room became almost tangible, a silent battleground of regret and unspoken truths. "Mark, I never wanted you to find out like this," she murmured, her voice wavering. There was a trace of desperation, as if she realized too late that her attempts at deception had only deepened the chasm between us. Her eyes searched mine, pleading for understanding, but I was too far gone in my anguish to offer any solace. The conversation that ensued was a maelstrom of accusations, justifications, and desperate pleas for forgiveness. Emily spoke haltingly, recounting moments of weakness and regret, trying to explain away the choices that had brought us to this crossroads. But every excuse felt like a betrayal in itself. I listened, each word a dagger that further eroded the last vestiges of the trust one had once held dear. In the midst of our verbal sparring, it became painfully clear that the love we had nurtured was not strong enough to withstand the onslaught of lies. That night, as the argument escalated, memories of our happier days clashed violently with the present, a stark juxtaposition that made the pain all the more unbearable. The conversation veered between moments of bitter resentment and fleeting attempts at reconciliation, yet neither side could find a middle ground. It was as though we were two strangers, desperately grasping at remnants of a shared past that no longer existed. I could see in Emily's eyes the realization that our life together had been irrevocably altered, and in my own heart, the hope for reconciliation was slowly slipping away. After hours of emotional confrontation, the silence that fell upon us was heavier than any words could convey. The weight of our decisions, the inevitability of our parting, was palpable. I realized that the confrontation had not brought me the closure I had so desperately sought. Instead, it had exposed the raw wounds of our relationship, making it clear that the damage was too profound to heal with mere apologies. In the days that followed our conversation, I found myself spiraling into a state of introspection. I would often take long walks through the empty streets of the city, each step carrying me further from the remnants of our shared life. The confrontation had left me with more questions than answers, questions about love, trust, and the fragility of human connections. I grappled with the notion that perhaps, in our quest for comfort and familiarity, we had allowed ourselves to be deceived by illusions of permanence. Despite the lingering pain, I began to see glimmers of a new clarity emerging from the depths of despair. The confrontation, though agonizing, had sparked a transformation within me, a painful but necessary metamorphosis. I started to understand that my identity was not solely defined by the relationship I had lost, but by the resilience that came from facing such a profound betrayal. I began writing down my thoughts and emotions, trying to piece together a narrative that could help me make sense of the chaos. The act of writing became a lifeline, a way to navigate through the overwhelming sea of loss and confusion. My friend Daniel, ever the steadfast confidant, continued to be a source of solace during these turbulent times. Over many long conversations, we dissected the layers of our shattered trust, exploring the complexities of human emotion and the consequences of our actions. Daniel's wisdom and unwavering support reminded me that, even in the depths of despair, there was hope for healing and renewal. He often said that every end is also a beginning, a notion that, while difficult to accept, resonated with me as I struggled to envision a future beyond the ruins of our past. Yet, as I began to contemplate the possibility of rebuilding my life, the ghost of our shared history loomed large. The memories of Emily's laughter, the warmth of her embrace, and the promises we had made together were not easily dismissed. They haunted me, a bittersweet reminder of a time when love was untainted by deceit. I found myself caught in a relentless tug-of-war between holding on to what once was and embracing the uncertain future that lay ahead. In the quiet moments of introspection, I also confronted the question of whether forgiveness was even possible. Could I ever find it within myself to forgive not just Emily, but also the part of me that allowed this betrayal to unfold? The journey toward self-forgiveness was arduous, fraught with doubts and lingering resentment. Each day was a battle against the urge to retreat into isolation, to let the pain define me indefinitely. But amidst the turmoil, I clung to the hope that one day, the scars of this betrayal would fade, leaving behind a wiser and more resilient version of myself. As the chapter of confrontation closed, the path forward seemed both daunting and inevitable. The love that had once bound us together was now reduced to a collection of shattered dreams and painful memories. The finality of our situation became increasingly clear with every passing day. I was beginning to see that the true cost of betrayal was not measured solely in heartbreak, but in the irrevocable loss of trust, a loss that could never be fully mended. The realization that our journey together was nearing its end weighed heavily on me. The confrontation had stripped away all illusions, leaving only the harsh reality of our crumbling bond. In the silence that followed, I began to prepare myself for the inevitable farewell, a farewell that would mark the conclusion of our shared life. Deep down, I knew that despite the agony of parting ways, it was a necessary step towards reclaiming my dignity and the future that awaited me. Thus, as I write these words, I stand at the crossroads of what once was and what can never be again. The confrontation with Emily has left me with a profound understanding of the fragility of human relationships and the unyielding need for truth. My heart remains heavy, burdened by the weight of betrayal, yet it also beats with a newfound determination, a determination to forge ahead, even if it means facing a future marked by hostility and separation. In the weeks that followed our painful confrontation, the chasm between Emily and me grew wider, deepening with every unspoken word and every cold glance. I found myself caught in a turbulent mix of despair and anger, each day feeling like a relentless battle against the tide of betrayal. The apartment, once our sanctuary, had transformed into a battleground where memories and emotions clashed with raw intensity. Every room echoed with the weight of lost trust, and each object whispered painful recollections of what once was. I tried to hold on to remnants of our shared past, but with every attempt, the bitter taste of deceit overwhelmed me. In the early mornings, I would stand by the window, staring blankly at the rising sun, wondering how something so beautiful could be marred by treachery. The once warm and welcoming light now felt like a harsh spotlight on the imperfections of our crumbling relationship. I began to question whether the person I had loved so deeply was ever truly there or if I had built my world around a fragile illusion. Emily, too, seemed to retreat further into herself. The spark that once ignited our conversations was now replaced by a silence laden with regret and resignation. Our once lively dinners became silent affairs, punctuated only by the clatter of cutlery and the occasional sigh. The distance between us was palpable, each passing day reinforcing the inevitability of our unraveling bond. I started to avoid the spaces where her presence was most pronounced, the armchair where she once sat reading, the kitchen table that had borne witness to our shared dreams, and found myself wandering the corridors of our home like a ghost, haunted by memories and doubts. The slow, painful erosion of our relationship took its toll on my mental and emotional well-being. I began spending more time alone, retreating into the solace of solitude in an effort to make sense of the chaos that had engulfed my life. My journal, once a safe haven for my thoughts and hopes, now overflowed with pages of anger, despair, and an overwhelming sense of betrayal. Every entry was a testament to the internal battle I fought daily, a struggle to reclaim my identity amidst the ruins of a love that had betrayed me. I attempted to reach out to friends and family, seeking comfort in shared empathy, yet each encounter left me feeling even more isolated. Conversations with Daniel became increasingly laced with the bitterness of our predicament, as he too lamented the loss of the relationship we both once cherished. "It's as if we're both prisoners of a past that refuses to let go," he remarked during one of our lengthy discussions, his voice tinged with sorrow. I could only nod in agreement, knowing that while his words resonated with truth, they also underscored the painful reality of our impending separation. At work, the distraction of daily responsibilities provided little respite from the constant barrage of intrusive thoughts. My performance began to waver under the weight of personal turmoil, and I found myself questioning if I could continue to function in a world where trust and loyalty had been so brutally dismantled. Each task, no matter how trivial, seemed to carry the echo of our fractured relationship. The sterile hum of the office, the routine of meetings and deadlines, all felt hollow in comparison to the depth of emotional void I was grappling with. Amid this internal disarray, I reached a point where the idea of a future with Emily no longer seemed viable. The dreams we had once woven together were now tattered remnants, their edges frayed by the relentless pull of betrayal and resentment. I started to entertain the notion of separation, not as a defeat, but as an imperative step toward reclaiming the dignity and peace that had been stolen from me. The more I dwelled on it, the more I realized that continuing in a relationship founded on lies was not only futile but deeply destructive. One evening, as the autumn winds began to chill the night air, I found myself sitting in the dim light of our living room, pondering the irrevocable damage that had been done. The conversation with Emily that night had left a residue of anger so potent that even the quiet moments seemed charged with hostility. I realized that every attempt to reconcile was met with mutual defensiveness and regret, a cycle that only deepened the wounds. The idea of a clean break, of a final chapter that would allow us both to heal separately, grew more appealing with each passing day. Yet, as I stewed in my thoughts, I couldn't shake the lingering memories of the life we once shared. I recalled the warmth of her laughter, the comfort of her touch, and the promises that had once bound us together. These memories, however bittersweet, clashed violently with the present reality, creating a tumultuous storm within me. I began to see that the process of separation would not be a simple act of walking away, it would be a slow, painful exorcism of all that we had built together, a battle to reclaim ourselves from the vestiges of shared intimacy and betrayal. I also wrestled with the legal and emotional implications of ending our marriage. The thought of divorce, with its inevitable battles over shared assets, mutual friends, and the shared history that could never be unlearned, was daunting. The mere idea of dismantling every aspect of our lives, from the smallest keepsake to the larger plans for our future, filled me with a profound sense of loss. Yet, every minute spent in this toxic limbo was another minute lost to the shadows of our past, a past that had become an inescapable prison. Late into the night, as I sat by the desk under the soft glow of a solitary lamp, I began drafting a letter not meant to be sent, but rather as a cathartic exercise in admitting the unvarnished truth. In it, I recounted every betrayal, every shattered hope, and every moment of despair. The act of writing was both liberating and painful, a confession of a love that had turned sour. It was in those quiet hours that I acknowledged the futility of trying to mend something that was already irreparably broken. The more I wrote, the clearer it became that my future lay on a different path, a path where the scars of betrayal would eventually give way to a newfound resilience and self-reliance. The decision was not made lightly. It was the culmination of countless sleepless nights, tear-streaked mornings, and moments of bitter introspection. I realized that staying in a relationship where trust had been so thoroughly violated would only lead to a lifetime of bitterness and regret. The day eventually arrived when I knew I had to confront the inevitable. In a conversation that was as cold as it was final, I sat down with Emily and laid bare the truth of my feelings. The dialogue was sparse, punctuated by long, heavy silences that spoke volumes of our mutual understanding. There was no dramatic outburst, no tearful pleas for reconciliation, only a resigned acknowledgement that the bridge between us had been burned beyond repair. That conversation marked the beginning of the end, a point of no return. We agreed that our paths must diverge, that our lives could no longer be intertwined by the bonds of a love that had soured into resentment. The decision, though painful, was a necessary step toward reclaiming our individual identities. It was a quiet, determined resolve that echoed the finality of our crumbling trust. In the solitude that followed, as I began the arduous process of disentangling my life from hers, I felt both a crushing sadness and a reluctant sense of liberation. The journey ahead promised to be fraught with emotional battles and difficult choices, yet it also held the promise of renewal, a chance to rebuild from the ruins of our past. The hostile end that loomed over us was not a vindictive act, but rather the inevitable culmination of a love betrayed, a bond dissolved by the corrosive force of dishonesty. Thus, as I stand on the precipice of a new, solitary chapter, I am left with the haunting realization that the final separation is not merely an end, but a beginning. A beginning of a future where the scars of betrayal may one day fade, replaced by the cautious hope of new beginnings. The path ahead is steeped in uncertainty, and every step away from our shared past is a step toward an unknown future, one that promises both solitude and the hard-won peace of self-reclamation. As winter's chill settled over the city, the inevitability of our final parting became undeniable. The apartment, once a witness to our dreams and laughter, now lay barren, stripped of warmth and haunted by memories too painful to bear. I had reached a point where every shared moment with Emily had transformed into an echo of betrayal, and the thought of clinging to what was left seemed not only futile but also dangerous for my own well-being. The day of our last meeting dawned gray and overcast. I knew that the final conversation would determine the end of our entangled lives, marking a split that was as hostile as it was irrevocable. In the early hours, I walked the quiet streets, each step heavy with the weight of memories, of a time when our love was vibrant, of the dreams we had painted together in the glow of hopeful mornings. Now, those dreams were but shattered fragments, and each step forward was a step away from the past. At exactly noon, we met at the small, local park that once served as our escape from the confines of routine life. The park, with its sprawling trees and crisp air, now felt like a battleground, a place where our final words would be exchanged amidst nature's indifferent beauty. Emily was already there, seated on a weathered bench beneath a large oak tree. Her eyes, once full of affection and laughter, now held a hardened resolve that mirrored my own. "Emily," I began, my voice steady yet laden with the sorrow of countless sleepless nights, "this is it. We can't go on living in this poisoned past." The words hung in the air, heavy with finality. There was a moment of tense silence, the kind that precedes the storm of emotions waiting to be unleashed. Emily's gaze met mine, and for a fleeting second, I saw a glimmer of the woman I had once adored. But that softness was quickly replaced by an unyielding hardness. "I suppose you've made up your mind," she replied, her tone devoid of the warmth that had once defined her voice. "There's nothing left for us but this bitter end." The conversation that unfolded was raw and unfiltered, a final accounting of grievances, regrets, and mutual blame. We spoke of the lies that had poisoned our every interaction, of the betrayals that had eroded the foundation of trust. I recounted the countless nights spent wrestling with despair and anger, and Emily admitted to the fractures in her own heart, the moments when she felt trapped by the weight of expectation. Yet, for every moment of shared understanding, there was an equal measure of resentment, a mutual recognition that we had become irreparably damaged. With every word, the chasm between us widened until it seemed as if no bridge could ever span the divide. Our voices grew sharper, tinged with bitterness. "You never listened," I accused, the words tumbling out in a rush of pent-up anguish. "You never cared about what we had until it was all gone." Her retort was equally piercing, laden with the pain of feeling misunderstood and abandoned. "I did care, Mark," she countered, "but sometimes, love isn't enough to sustain a lie." The air around us seemed to crackle with hostility as we recounted old wounds and aired grievances that had festered in silence for too long. There was no room for solace in that moment, only the cold, hard reality that our lives had diverged to the point of no return. Every shared memory, once a testament to a bond that had seemed unbreakable, now served as a painful reminder of what we had both lost. In the midst of the verbal onslaught, a deep, unspoken truth began to crystallize. The finality of our decision was not born solely of anger or resentment, but of a profound recognition that we could no longer exist as a unit. Our love, once a sanctuary of hope and promise, had curdled into a bitter relic of betrayal. The possibility of mending what had been broken seemed as remote as the warmth of summer on a cold winter day. After what felt like an eternity of heated exchanges and reluctant admissions, we both fell into a heavy silence, a silence that resonated with the finality of a door being closed for the last time. In that silence, the inevitable truth was laid bare: our journey together had reached its bitter end. There would be no reconciliation, no healing of wounds that had been inflicted too deeply. Instead, we were left with the painful understanding that our lives were meant to diverge, each of us left to rebuild, or perhaps, to simply live with the scars of what once was. In that final moment, as I stood up from the bench, the resolve in my heart solidified into a quiet but unyielding determination. "This is goodbye, Emily," I said softly, yet firmly, knowing that these were the words that would forever sever the last ties of our shared past. Her eyes, brimming with unshed tears and a defiant spark, met mine one last time before she turned away, her steps carrying her toward an uncertain future that would now be spent apart from me. I watched her leave, each step echoing the finality of our parting, until she was nothing more than a distant figure swallowed by the wintry landscape. Standing alone on that desolate park bench, I felt an overwhelming mix of sorrow, relief, and a somber acceptance of the hostilities that had defined our final farewell. The sharp, cold air bit at my skin as if to remind me that from this moment forward, every shared heartbeat and every tender memory would belong to the past. Walking away, I carried with me the bitter remnants of our love, a love that had once promised so much but ultimately crumbled under the weight of betrayal. As I trudged along the path, the realization dawned upon me that while our separation was hostile and painful, it was also a necessary step toward reclaiming the dignity and peace that had been lost. In the echoes of that final goodbye, I understood that sometimes, letting go was the only way to salvage what little remained of oneself. The road ahead was shrouded in uncertainty, each step a painful reminder of the loss that had reshaped my world. Yet, within that uncertainty lay the faint, flickering hope of rediscovery, of finding a new identity beyond the confines of a broken promise. The separation was final, irrevocable, and imbued with a hostility that spoke to the depth of our wounds. It was a parting not marked by mutual forgiveness, but by a raw, unfiltered acknowledgement that our lives, intertwined for so long, were now destined to travel separate, solitary paths. In that hostile separation, there was a tragic beauty, a recognition that some bonds, once broken, are never meant to be repaired. As the last vestiges of our shared life dissolved into the cold embrace of winter, I turned my back on the past, stepping forward into a future where the ghosts of betrayal would forever linger, yet where the promise of new beginnings awaited. Our farewell, etched in bitterness and marked by irrevocable division, signified not just the end of our relationship, but the irrevocable end of a chapter that could never be rewritten.